Hi, everybody. Welcome back to English 221. This is for our class for Wednesday, the 29th, where I wanted to finish talking about the syllabus and begin to introduce the idea of Shakespearean biography. So, in terms of the syllabus, you'll remember that I had skipped the section on plagiarism, which is basically taking somebody else's language or ideas and not acknowledging the source. But as long as you give credit, then you're no longer plagiarizing. And in terms of plagiarism, it's considered theft. This would be theft of intellectual property, and the consequences can be significant. It could be failing an assignment, but it could be as significant as being expelled with a notation on your transcript that you plagiarized. And usually I give two stories to encourage people not to be tempted to plagiarize. One actually occurred to me early on in my career, and this was pre-internet, so I could not rely on the internet to try to find the original source. And as many sources as exist to help students plagiarize, probably an equal number exists to help teachers determine if students are plagiarizing. But I'm reading a paper. Again, I didn't have access to those internet sources. Something sounds familiar, and then it occurs to me very quickly that what I'm reading is text from our college textbook that I had assigned for class. So, as if I wouldn't notice, with a few mechanical errors in there, whether it's because the person was a sloppy plagiarist or whether it was because they were hopeful that a few errors might perhaps mislead me. The better story, however, occurred around the same time, pre-internet, not to me, but to a middle-aged professor who was featured in all the academic newspapers. So there are academic newspapers, and it is important that this is a middle-aged professor. As he's reading papers and something sounds familiar, and he realizes that the reason why it sounds familiar is not because he's read it before, but because he himself wrote it decades earlier when he was an undergraduate student. It's one of his old papers. And of course, I know the chance is 1 in a million, and this is why it was featured in all the academic newspapers. It had something to do with a fraternity that was recycling past papers from former fraternity members. But these stories, I suppose, while they are encouraging in terms of the consequences of plagiarism, don't necessarily get to some of the challenges that we have today with artificial intelligence. And we are in a brave new world, so to speak. And I do encourage you not to use artificial intelligence in this class for several reasons. And not that I'm necessarily averse to artificial intelligence, but first and foremost, it sounds a little bit corny, but the whole educational idea of learning on your own. And I have incorporated elements into the class where you are giving credit for effort, such as your participation grade, and areas where you can improve your grade, such as a revision of your first paper. I also do have concerns about artificial intelligence, about what it perhaps might mean for our future from an economic perspective. The kinds of changes that we're seeing should be happening over decades, not days, as happens with artificial intelligence, which could wipe out entire industries. I also have concerns about what artificial intelligence might become in the future. Anybody who's seen any science fiction movie knows that things don't usually go well when the technology becomes so advanced that the humans can no longer control it. I also just have general concerns about the accuracy of artificial intelligence. So, if any of you have read articles about the idea of hallucination, where artificial intelligence is creating false information, then you understand that perhaps artificial intelligence is not the be all end all that it is considered to be, or that it could be perhaps in the future. But I'm hopeful that with your writing critical papers, that you don't need to rely on outside sources, that what I'm asking you is really to rely on class learning and knowing that there are elements embedded in the class to allow you to be successful, that you would, at least for this course, not use artificial intelligence. So, With that said, I have 3 videos for you to watch. One is about 45 minutes long, so I'm going to make this short today. It's an A&E biography about William Shakespeare. The second is a 5-minute video asking, was William Shakespeare, real? And the third being a TED Talk, 4 minutes. Did Shakespeare write his plays? So after all of these videos, and you can see that they are in the notes below this video. I'll always post the notes below the video with the links for these videos. Today's attendance question, and this will be the class discussion form that would be due on Friday the 31st. And again, if you need additional time, let me know. After watching all of that, do you think Shakespeare was the author of the works attributed to him? And why or why not? What we'll talk about next class is we'll talk about Shakespeare's theaters. We'll talk about some of his texts. We'll also begin to introduce the idea of the sonnets, because we will be reading sonnets 15, 18, 20, 127, 130, and 151 as introduction before we get into our first play, A Midsummer Night's Dream. And I encourage you to start reading that play early so that when we get to the point where we're discussing A Midsummer Night's Dream, and we will be discussing it over several classes, you can be reading the next play in turn, which happens to be Much Ado About Nothing. And if you're looking for good texts for Shakespeare, I had talked a little bit about one of my favorites being the Riverside Shakespeare. Any text by Pelican, so the Pelican Shakespeare, or any text by Signet, the Signet Shakespeare, those are also excellent texts for Shakespeare. And some of the nice things about the Signet and the Pelican is that you can get the plays individually. You don't necessarily have to get them all the way that they would be included in the Riverside Anthology. I also have a link for you, and this is in the 5th section in the notes below with recommended sources. Certainly you can find Shakespeare in a lot of different places online, but if you're looking for what's considered to be one of the definitive places for finding Shakespearean texts, it would be through the Folger Shakespeare Library, which is the basically mecca of Shakespeare in the United States in Washington, D.C. So I've included their link, and you can access the Shakespeare plays for free. And of course, they also will sell you versions of Shakespeare plays with footnotes. So you may not necessarily always get the footnotes for free, but at least you've got the access to the text for free. So with that said, I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. Next class, we'll revisit the idea of Shakespearean biography. Who was he? As well as talking a little bit about the theaters of the time, the history of the time, and some of Shakespeare's texts. Take care. Bye-bye.